Hello, everybody. As everyone gets settled in, we've got two poll questions that we'd love for people to respond to and get a little bit of thoughts before we get started. So feel free to fill that out while we wait for everybody to join. And thank you for attending the webinar. Really appreciate everybody being here. We're going to have some wonderful discussions. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to post them in chat and we'll answer them when we can and maybe weave them into some of our questions. All right, everybody get your final responses in and we'll take a look at the results before hopping in. All right, so how excited is everybody today to learn a little bit more from our experts we've got here? For the majority of folks, they're thrilled, got their pens and papers ready. So I hope all of our panelists are ready to share some really great content because we got some note takers. And I think some food for thought for our discussion so that our panelists can kind of gear their responses a little bit to what people are mostly interested in. So as a company leader, what are your top two biggest business challenges right now? We actually have quite a mix of options here, but it looks like retention, feedback, and employee engagement is coming in number one. And a close second is employee professional development and career mapping. So I think that's going to be something that we'll definitely touch on today. So really excited to hop in and share this with everybody. So thanks for attending our webinar on how tech is leading the way in creating a best-in-class employee experience. I'll be our moderator and host. I'm Greg Erickson, Manager of People Insights at 3Q Digital. I actually go by any pronoun. And if you don't know much about 3Q Digital, we're the world's largest digital independent growth marketing agency. We've grown to almost 500 employees that embrace the 3Q way and follow our 4 core values of be inclusive, act for the greater good, own it, and accept no limits. And if you've been to one of these webinars before, you'll know all about All Voices. But if this is your first time, let me clue you in a little bit and talk about our hosts. So All Voices is an employee intelligent platform that systematically asks for, accepts, analyzes, and acts on feedback of all kinds. So with that tool, you'll be able to find ideas, good ideas and bad habits in real time, reducing turnover and recruiting costs. So let's hop in and talk a little bit about how the tech industry is uniquely positioned to create a fantastic employee experience. We've collected a few statistics to help kind of think about this topic and create some food for thought. The first one being that it's critical that organizations listen and understand the individual experiences of their employees. We know this because in 2021, All Voices released their State of Employee Feedback and found that 41% of employees have left a job because they didn't feel listened to. Another piece of information to keep in mind is that flexibility is an important piece of the conversation. In a Gartner survey, over half employees surveyed found that around the world, people consider leaving their role during the pandemic if it didn't include some form of flexibility on where or when to work. So if these stats or anything that we talk about along the way inspires you to ask some questions, please feel free to post those in chat and we'll try to answer them along the way. And now I'd like to pass it over to our panelists to introduce themselves with their names, their pronouns, and what they do at their organization. And to get us started, I'll hand it over to Juliet.
Hi, thank you, Greg, and good afternoon, everybody, or good morning to some. I am Juliet Austin. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the head of equity and belonging for Zillow Group based in New York City.
All right, hi, everyone. I'm Felicia Jones. My pronouns are she, her, and y'all. And I work for PagerDuty, which is a digital management platform. So Operations Cloud is our thing. And I am the Senior Director of People Development. And my team oversees the employee experience when it comes to career-making moments across onboarding, learning, development, growth, and performance management. And that's a little bit about me.
So Kayla Silva, I am the Director of People Services at Smarsh. And I oversee the HR business partner team as well as our HR operations team as our just director of both of those. And the business partner team mostly focuses on business partnering with our C-staff leaders globally. And then our HR operations team is more focused on the regional needs of things like onboarding, compliances, et cetera. So any general HR support there. And I am actually in Portland, Oregon.
And I'm Becky Bea. I work for Health Catalyst, SVP of People Operations. Pretty broad coverage, really anything related to people operations except for recruiting. So comp, benefits, business partners. For those of you who don't know who Health Catalyst is, we are a data analytics company that works with healthcare systems to improve outcomes, save lives, and improve revenue. So very noble cause, and excited to be here and share with you some of our experience over the last few years.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So the first thing that I want to do as we discuss this topic is dissect the prompt a little bit. So to get everybody aligned, let's think about the term best in class and kind of define what that means to some of us. So Becky, I actually want to turn it right back to you. And what does it mean to be best in class, at least at Health Catalyst?
Yeah, that's a great question. And best in class, I think, really depends on the type of company and culture that you want to build. But some things that have made us best in class, and we've won numerous awards for best places to work, which I'm very proud of, is a lot of what you touched on early on. Interestingly enough, Greg, it is listening, just being good listeners, understanding what is going on in the workforce, what people need to be happy, and making sure that we're being responsive to what their pain points are. We have a core belief that we put people first. They are at the heart of everything we do. We're only as good as our people. And, for many companies, that's words on the wall. But for us, it is first and foremost. Anytime we make decisions, we think about our people. Sometimes, it can be less beneficial to company needs in order to make sure that our people are put first. And so that's definitely an interesting balance that we need to strike. To your point, flexibility and ensuring a good work-life balance, I think more so than ever, everyone should be focused on that to be an employer of choice. It's very difficult to compete in this market with the 50, 60-hour work weeks because people just aren't doing them anymore. So I think there's been a shift in what work-life balance means, and that flexibility doesn't mean a 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, and that's important. The last thing I'll add is benefits, and there's a laundry list of benefits that are out there, but I think the important thing is that your benefits support the culture. We can't keep up with this rat race of the next best thing. I see articles all the time, and this company's doing this, and somebody's doing this, and what are you doing to keep up? And it's just not sustainable. So I think you have to align your benefits with the culture you try and support. If you want people in the office all the time, 3 free meals, some sleeping pods are great. If you want to promote work-life balance and support remote work, give them a generous office, allowance to create an environment that's productive, have flexible work schedules, and don't micromanage them. And so I think that it's critical that your benefits are aligned with the culture you want to create, and that you're not always chasing the next best thing, because it's not going to get the outcomes that you want. So those are just a few thoughts.
Right. Work. And I love the way that, you're going more internally with your focus and thinking about what your employees are saying and what they feel like is most critical for the way that they want to work. Yeah. And Juliet, I'd actually love to hear from you as well to learn a little bit more about what it means to be best in class at Zillow.
Yeah, thanks for that. And thanks, Becky, for your response. I want to highlight what you shared also, which is the work-life balance. We think of it as work-life integration, and we've leaned into the flexibility and having a distributed workforce model that we've adopted really early on, and also helped to lead us into being Fortune 100's best company to work for as well. And so it just was a demonstration of, one, like you said, shared Becky, listening to our employees, but also kind of putting just predicting the future of work as well, especially in a pandemic environment and what that means, not just for Zillow, but for people and work in general, especially in our society now and what that looks like and globally. So it required a lot of innovation, a little bit of trepidation and trying to do something new, but it's what we heard and what we know our employees valued and really needed. And so when I think of best in class, or what those leading practices are, it's really taking into account the entire employee experience, or the life cycle of the employee in the workspace. It's the sum of the quality of those interactions, the relationships, all of those milestone moments that employees have in their journey with the company, all the way from pre-recruitment all the way to post-exit as well. So all of those interactions with people and the organizational culture, which we emphasize our core values, and again, leaning into flexibility and distributed workforce as an important part of who we are in our culture, and listening to our employees. And also considering the physical workspace. And even though we're in a pandemic environment and we weren't leveraging our offices like many other organizations out there, that virtual distributed workspace reality also meant being best in class in thinking about the physical home workspace as well, and taking that into consideration, and then also supporting overall employee well-being from our homes as well. So whether it was supporting or providing resources to help support our home office layouts and what we need to work effectively from home, or other well-being services and opportunities for connection, including mental health support, gym memberships, how we approach our time off, et cetera, all has an impact on the overall employee experience as well.
Right. And so that integration really is kind of exuding or permeating through every decision it sounds like you're making at Zillow, not just about the hours that people work, but where and how they're doing it. And so the next thing I'd love to do is dissect a little bit the idea of being uniquely positioned to create a best-in-class employee experience. And I think some of the driver behind this question is getting our audience to be able to kind of get into your mind space and think a little bit similar to how you think about things. How can you capitalize on the unique position of your company in order to create this kind of best-in-class experience? And so, Felicia, I'd love to ask you a little bit about how you kind of view the unique position of PagerDuty.
Yeah. So when I think about best in class, I'm usually thinking that that's just a needle that's constantly moving. So like what is best today is not going to be best tomorrow. It could be a whole other set of, values and priorities and things that we expect from what is truly best at this time. And so if anyone out there, if you haven't kind of had some reflection and evaluated like, who am I? Or what are my values now, what I've learned, and we're in the junior year of the pandemic, like what have I actually learned and how do I get ready for that next phase, that next normal? So we call this the reshuffling, and the reshuffling not only of talent, but a reshuffling of values. And those values are prompting people to make those certain decisions in their careers, whether to stay or leave. So thinking about that reshuffling, PagerDuty actually went through the exercise last year of really kind of reflecting and looking at our purpose, mission, and vision. And did those still remain true? Could we find the signals and cues across the organization based on what we learned the last 2 years? So one way we're uniquely positioned is that we actually reshuffled our own selves on like what we care about, how we empower our customers. And then that is our North Star. Knowing that it's a work in progress, we're going to reevaluate that purpose, mission, and vision as we listen to our customers and employees. And so there's openness to iterate. So like my second point here is that purpose, mission, and vision is in our North Star. That should help us prioritize our goals across the strategy. And we've actually done that. We used our purpose, mission, and vision to actually think about, do we need 5 goals or can we narrow down to 4? And so we went from 5 to 4 to help people prioritize what we're focused on to help execute and service our customers, but also create a really great employee experience. And so we're hoping that will allow us to iterate and also respond appropriately. So we have a new team within the people team that's focused on our listing strategy. And we're a response platform. So with that listening, we hope to respond in the right way. And in our platform, we really highly value metrics and data and measures to help us figure out where are our gaps or where do we need to pivot. And that will probably go back to our purpose, mission, vision. Are we delivering? Is our employee experience, is our platform really providing the outputs needed to really realize that our purpose and vision and mission are coming to life? So that accountability loop and mechanism is how we're positioning ourselves uniquely to be best in class, knowing that that best is constantly moving the needle, because expectations of leaders and customers and employees is constantly in this flow state, just based on what's happening in the world. So I'll leave you with this, is that how to uniquely position your own company is to do that reshuffling and create an accountability mechanism that allows you to measure, respond, and listen appropriately. And obviously, that will allow you to move quickly when you're measuring everything you do.
Right. And if you have these expectations of flexibility kind of permeating your culture, you need to make sure that it's happening in all parts of the organization, not just something that you're saying that others should do. So I love that. And Becky, I'd actually love to pass it back to you and learn a little bit about how Health Catalyst kind of uniquely positions themselves.
Yeah, well, I think Felicia said a lot of great things that we're also doing. She talked about the North Star, and I think that is critical to the success of determining what direction your company takes, how you respond to this plethora of feedback and changes that are happening. And, when we started growing as a company, our co-founders got some great advice, and it was identify the things that can't change and build everything around that. And then as you make decisions, they should always be centered on those things that can't change, because that is kind of the purpose of your company. And back to that, building a great place based on the culture you want to create, that's critical to that, right? I will tell you what we've done that I've seen that has just created some beautiful changes in our company is listening sessions. And I just sometimes I get emotional sharing this, but we have affinity or ERG groups, just like many people. Our LGBT group was the first one to come forward and say, hey, we need some representation. I don't know who at the company is like me. And so how do I figure that out? How do I know? And so we started our first group with targeting our LGBTQ and allies. And the very first thing they did was we just had some very brave souls that said, hey, I think there's a lot of stigma around the LGBT community, especially in our company particularly. And we want to have a Q&A session. And it wasn't ask me anything. We had some anonymous questions submitted. We had a panel of our LGBTQ members, as well as a couple of executive leaders, including our CEO. And I tell you, these were some hard-hitting questions. In some ways, it was just ignorance. People weren't meaning to be hurtful, but the fact of the matter is they just hadn't had exposure to someone that was different than them. And hearing these people share their personal experiences, their life experiences, it was almost like a magical shift in our company, in that people really felt like I can start bringing my whole self to work. I don't have to look and act and think like our leadership team. I can be me and still add value and be part of this organization. And that kind of kicked off all of our listening sessions. And now we have 5 ERGs or affinity groups for various demographics of people. And twice a year, our leadership team comes in and they have listening sessions, particularly for these groups. And they say, look, we're here to be good listeners. We don't want to solve problems. We're going to ask questions. And literally, those are kind of the rules of the meeting is we're not giving solutions today. We want to be good listeners. We're going to take this back and talk about it and make changes. So they're not being reactive and they are being thoughtful to those varying demographics that we have in our organization. You know, our CEO responds to every single Glassdoor review, encourages people to post those reviews twice a year. You can post twice a year, and he looks at them, responds to them, shares them with the entire company, shares the comments, shares his responses, and it's happens on a monthly basis. And so, you know, it's more than just listening, but it's also responding. And you can't always do what people ask, right? You can't be the company that says yes to everything, because some things are just not feasible. And so, but if you respond to them, let them know that you're listening, explain why this isn't something that we can do, but we'll keep it on the docket until it is something we can do. They feel heard, they feel valued, and you're making sure you're addressing the right things at the right time. And so that's where I think our unique position is we've just learned to become really, really good listeners and very transparent and responsive to the feedback that we are getting. And it's nuanced and it's hard. And, but I think we're getting there. We still have a lot to learn, but I've seen so much change over the last couple of years in our efforts to do this.
It's really inspiring too to hear that your ERGs are kind of leading the way as one of those people doing that authentic listening and that authentic responding, and kind of setting up a culture of psychological safety. And that leads us perfectly into this next question where we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And we actually had a question shared ahead of time from someone that I'm going to weave into this question. So they mentioned that Black employees are 7 times less likely than their white counterparts to want to return to an office environment. So when we think about the role of tech companies in creating this best-in-class employee experience, especially one that is also inclusive and equitable, what do organizations need to think about? And Kayla, I'd love to hear from you first on this.
Yeah, and Becky, it's almost like you read my mind as you were saying your last statement. So I'm going to expand on that a little bit. Really, what I think the role of a company needs to be is to listen, to learn, and to act. So literally just everything Becky just said. But I think that those pieces are just so important into creating an inclusive and equitable workplace. Just going off of the question that came in, right? I think listening to our employees and getting the feedback from them during this pandemic and everything of, are you even going to want to go back to work? We've already proven now over the last 2 years that we can work remotely. What is your preference? And taking that feedback in, listening to what they have to say, and then acting on it. And I will also say, to Becky's point, you know, we can't act on every single thing that we would love to. I mean, I love everyone's ideas and I'm always willing to be a listening ear. But I think that transparency is also really important. So if you can't act on something, explaining the why or what you can do, whether it's budget or if it's headcount or an event that people want to do, just being, I guess, like very transparent of what you are able to do, what you can't do, and you know how you're going to act on their feedback moving forward, I think it goes a really long way, I would say. And I feel like people who join high growth tech companies are wanting to be heard because they didn't join a high growth tech company to just be I guess like a number or a cog in a machine. They want to be heard. They want to have impact in their business. And so showing them that their feedback is heard and acting and listening. And then I think also just on that learning piece, I'm not the expert in everything. I'm not an expert in a lot of things, actually. And so how can I learn from my employees of what they want to give them the best experience possible?
I'll jump in here in terms of this idea of inclusion and equity and how that builds into the employee experience. So, you know, I agree on, you know, not everyone is ready to go back to the office. But there is like a sense of community building I think people grasp or desire, no matter if you want to work from home, anywhere in the office. And we have to think about how are you community building, not just in the office, but actually in this remote or hybrid world, and giving people options to, be called in or have an option to, choose how they build community. And, ERGs have been mentioned a couple of times here, and that's really where I think the community building can actually come to life, and working closely with employee experience or workplace experience teams to really how you leverage like office openings or different socials so that those members have a chance to, community build and are given permission to do so. So I will say community building is something we need to look at in terms of connecting humans to humans. And then thinking about more like actionable and practical practices that we've been kind of implemented at PagerDuty are norms. So one thing I realize is humans don't know how to show up if we don't actually name how to show up, because then people just guess, how do I show up? And as leaders, is enabling leaders to give permission or to create space for people to say, hey, let's actually outline our norms, which is shared agreements or shared understanding or clean agreements for how we're going to communicate or how we're going to, get decisions done or get work done or share when we're working. People need that sense of clarity so that they can create boundaries. And we have a value at PagerDuty called bring yourself. And I can't bring myself when the boundaries or how I set boundaries is not clear. So you can be more inclusive if you name in your norms how we're going to include everyone in key decisions, actions as a team. Secondly, we use narratives, and taking a page out of Amazon's book, because PowerPoint slides do not create an equitable and inclusive experience, because you need someone to stand in front of slides. If you actually allow people to write their ideas down, you give them open space to articulate their ideas, and then you create time in a meeting or before a meeting for everyone to give feedback with the norms of questions and feedback is welcome, and you talk about that. So people don't need PowerPoint slides. They can actually read your thoughts, and you're getting actual written down questions that you can consider for your team to implement that idea quicker. And it actually provides that transparency and clarity. And the last thing I'll say, after a major program or delivery, we do facilitated retrospectives. And that is a facilitated discussion where those who are involved have a chance to reflect on what went well, what didn't go well, and how you actually can move forward, learning from that experience. And that one is an equitable space where people can share how their experience was and key considerations to create more inclusive projects, working experience moving forward. So there's some tangible things when we think about like work behaviors and work habits that teams can adopt so that people feel like that co-creation of ideas, they're more likely to buy in and participate and show up when there's that co-creation across those different mechanisms.
If I can just add to all of that, I just want to emphasize and amplify what was shared by Kayla and Felicia as well. I think Kayla, you had shared Listen, Learn, Act, and Felicia, you're giving some examples about learning as well. And I want to just emphasize the learning piece as well. I think one of the things, or the role of tech companies is really to create those safe spaces and the pathways to engage in learning. I think there's an assumption sometimes that people in general have an innate knowledge or skills around inclusive behaviors and belonging, but these are learned skills and knowledge areas, and so that require practice as well, and reinforcement. And so I think it's a really important highlight for organizations to just create that space and make the investment in it. And that's the key. That's where the rubber hits the road, right? Like, are we going to invest in this? But I also do think that there are creative ways to engage in learning as well that continue to engage people in that self-awareness building, but then also tying that learning back to the whole purpose and strategy and objective of the organization as well. So whether it's their cultural values or their business strategy as a whole. So that learning experience helps to kind of tie it all together.
Yeah, and all of this kind of ties back to that creating of culture of learning where people feel comfortable making mistakes and kind of growing from there. And so I love the way that everybody kind of ties things together there. And one thing I noticed as well is the way that the conversation that we've all had here includes people from, that aren't just in HR. And it leads perfectly into our next question around retention. I know that, it's a big driver behind why people might be here to understand, how to create a best-in-class employee experience, because retention's been especially difficult these days. And so when we think about retention, we know that it's not just something that HR or the DEI team or that the people team can solve on their own, but it's more of a team sport. So help us get into your headspace again a little bit. And how do you think about retention and some of the initiatives that you might want to implement and maybe things that you don't want to implement? I know we talked about personalization at scale, whether or not you should be looking at attrition number, professional and career development. Juliet, I'd love to pass it back to you again and kind of get your thoughts on thinking through retention strategies.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that the question isn't framed necessarily, it's framed as a team sport versus the responsibility of just HR, or even sometimes even a singular person, right? That has this role of somehow magically influencing an entire company's retention strategy or approach. Even the word strategy, I hesitate on because it implies that there's a singular framework that is going to impact retention, but and really as a team sport, it's recognizing that people are in different places at different points of their career journey and experience within an organization. So a multitude of things would need to be approached to have an impact on retention as well. But there's that famous quote that says that employees don't leave companies, they leave people, right? We've all heard that. And while there is some truth to that, I think the root of that statement really speaks to that employee's sense of connection, community, belonging, even beyond their immediate manager. There was a recent McKinsey article, well, recent as of fall of last year, I guess, that is called Shaping the New Possibilities Through Employee Experience. I may have gotten that wrong, but I believe that's the title. And when I read that, it really hit me because in their research, they highlighted 9 elements for companies to get right across 3 categories: one, social experience, work experience, and organization experience. And while 9 feels like a lot of balls to keep in the air, that's exactly where the collective team effort and sport of the company comes in. And so at Zillow, we're always kind of trying to find new ways. And I don't think that any one organization has pinned it down just yet, right? But we're constantly trying to innovate in this space and continuing to find ways to recreate or maybe evolve the social experience in our new work environment. We found that Slack, and I know it's a really common tool, but we leverage tools like Slack in a way very heavily to engage employees across a myriad of channels, but it really serves as a function to communicate to the organization as a whole, to all of our employees, and to create transparency. And so we found that transparency and communication are key drivers for employee experience and retention. And so in a hybrid work environment, just looking for ways to sometimes over communicate and creating more avenues for transparency is important. And incidentally, those channels enable teamwork to happen as well. And they're also a platform for employees to just have fun and really bring out their own interests and personalities. Recently, I just discovered our cat and dog channels, which was quite interesting and very popular apparently. But then we also have channels that are focused on locations or city-focused channels, which is a valuable tool in shrinking an otherwise really lonely and vague employee experience to one where we can network and build relationships, even beyond what was even possible when we were in the office. And we're finding that that type of engagement is impacting our employee experience and overall retention as well. In addition to that, we've also, just going back to the theme of flexibility and work-life integration, are seeing that creating formal formal structures around how we work is important as well. So we've leaned into exploring different ways of flexibility, including core hours, instituting core hours for meetings, which I'll be honest, I was kind of curious about myself, but I find for a lot of teams, it's really helpful in giving permission for folks to integrate their personal lives. So those core working hours are for teams for conversations of 3 or more people between the hours of 10 and 2 Pacific time, for example. And then everything outside of that is certainly flexible, and everybody, can work with that time the way they need, but it's giving us permission to work differently. And so again, listening to our employees, that's the core of the feedback and the theme, which is we want to have options. We want to have more control over how we work, where we work, and how we connect with each other as well.
I can chime in here in terms of retention. My team thinks about this all the time. And I was on a panel at a conference last month, and someone's like, stop measuring attrition. And I was like, oh, what? And everyone's been measuring attrition lately. That's like our default, like who's leaving. But again, listening, it's not about, why, who's leaving. It's like, why are they leaving? And then everyone probably on this call knows that you look at your exit surveys and people are leaving for career development opportunities. And we're like, what does that really mean? And so Juliet, I loved how you talked about like those experiences across those different spectrums, because if you really dive into that and you go and do some research, you realize there hasn't been transparency, or maybe they didn't have a voice. And then when people don't know where to go, they look elsewhere, right? They will find another opportunity, place, environment that will listen to them, that meets their needs. So it's a couple of things that we realize is like the idea of activity around retention. Sometimes it's assumed like HR, retention, help us, but the activity of retaining employees is not with HR. HR can create the mechanisms, the systems to support the leader to lead their leaders to how to retain their teams. Look at org capacity, capabilities to ensure that the mix and the combination and composition is one that one will stay, So I really think that, that activity needs to shift, and that accountability to the teams and the leaders, because HR is only finding out the why and what happened in those exit surveys. I see someone mention state interviews, 100% usually our HR BPs, we'll encourage our managers to do that, but incorporating that into the flow of continuous conversations is so important. So speaking of that is like, we can't assume in these new changing times and change happening all the time, there is a change fatigue and new expectations on managers. So one thing my team has started this past quarter is looking at the talent, both internally and externally, to determine what may a manager be challenged with and how can we coach them around that in a safe environment. So we've started manager coaching clinics, and we pick one topic. In 90 minutes, we cover 3 different coaching moments across that one key topic. We just did one on winning talent in today's market. And because it's hiring, everyone's hiring, right? So how do you position that? And so we're trying to equip managers with insight in coaching so that they can know how to effectively hire, do a state interview, engage their team without us assuming that they know how to do those things effectively. And the last thing I will say is, because people are moving, we want to look at how our employees can move within the organization versus externally in the organization. So my team has launched a career development experience, with CDX, we're calling it, which is a combination of multiple levers that convey to the employee like how one moves. So we're not only looking at our career architectures, but we know we have to change the philosophy on how people think about talent when they recruit talent internally. And we're working with our talent partners to maybe be counselors for someone when someone wants to explore an internal opportunity. We're also looking at our career architecture to see, does it clearly outline pathways? Because if they only show up as the only way and not a rock wall, then that's going to prevent someone from not having transparency on how they can move across or within the organization. So we just started this, but we're realizing that when things are unclear, it's hard to retain your employees because we haven't made it clear how one moves within or across or up and down. And so we're trying to really get a hold of our roles and how we communicate and equip managers and employees to have career conversations. So really a lot of just differing levels, but I'll leave with this is like, you can tell it takes a team. It's a team effort, from the leader to the department leaders, to the first line managers, to the employee wanting and willing to see those signals across the organization that I want to be here. Because very quickly to spot the things that tell you I don't want to be here. So we got to make those things of why I stay so more transparent in everything we do and say, so people believe and feel that they want to stay.
One thing I'm hearing across all of these answers too is kind of enabling people to solve the challenges of retention. So, giving employees tools where they can share their feedback, build connections, have conversations about their careers. Managers can, have the tools to have those tough conversations and, kind of talk about career pathing, and our senior leadership, getting them the information that they need to really understand what's going on in the workforce and what adjustments they can make. So sounds like enablement is a really key part of kind of building that we're all in it together kind of approach to retention. And I want to dive in a little bit more to managers as well, because we've talked a lot about educating them and making sure that they have the tools that they need. Because a lot of times, they enter a room with their teammates and HR is not there to support them. So how can we make sure that our managers are really well equipped to kind of to create a best-in-class employee experience without the people team or the HR team or the DEI team there to support them along the way? And Kayla, I'd actually love to turn to you to hear a little bit more of your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think training is so important. Even if you've been a leader before, we make an effort to train you on how to be a leader at Smarsh, because it's going to be different no matter where you go. Like we've heard from everyone here, people have different norms and ways of working and interacting at their own companies. And so I think it's so important to do training up front, giving them the tools that they need to be successful leaders at our own company. And then I would say with new managers, especially people who are, I guess, quote unquote, homegrown within a company, we take even a more personalized touch to that because it's likely their first time being a manager. And so we'll do more one-on-one coaching and I guess feedback loops with them, et cetera, like using 360 tools and such. And I think that's really where the business partner model comes into play and has been very helpful for us in being that coach and almost holding a mirror to a leader. I think it's reminding them that they're an employee as well and having them reflect on what would they like to experience as an employee and how this could affect someone else. And so I think going back to the employee's experience, training and teaching managers what it means and the impact that they have as a leader. I mean, employees are spending 90% of their time with their leader more often than not. And so how is that leader creating a best-in-class work environment? They're an extension of us almost. And so we have to trust that they are able to go out and spread all of our words of wisdom and practice the things that we have. And so I think the more coaching we can give our new leaders to do that on the VP side, and then also just more training and development throughout their career. I think it doesn't have to just be within those first few months that we're training people. It's an ongoing thing as stuff comes up. I mean, every situation is unique, every company's unique. So just staying with them through that. And that, again, more of the VP model side, that continuous coaching and development with a leader.
And so it sounds like a theme here along the way too is really having that continuous feedback loop of hearing, what are your managers experiencing? How can we help them at this exact moment? Or what are our employees experiencing? So how do you work into your culture, this continuous feedback loop, or what role does it play in your organization? Becky, I'd love to get your thoughts on how you kind of create this.
Yeah, it's interesting because there's been an evolution in and almost a power shift, if I might, which is a pretty provocative term, in decision-making and what drives a company. And, you know, pre-COVID, I think there was a lot of power in the hands of employers to say, this is why we're a great company. We offer X, Y, and Z, or we offer A, B, and C. And if you want to be part of this, we'd love to have you. And then COVID comes along, right? And we have to completely shift our mentality. We're dealing with human beings now, not resources, and people who have lives, kids at home, other adults in the home that are working at the same time, because we're all remote in a world dealing with a pandemic that we have never experienced. And so it was a critical shift that companies had to stand up and say, how do we take care of our people? How do we guide them through this huge thing that we're going through? And how, as leaders, do we do that when we're going through much of the same things that they're experiencing and feeling? And so there was a shift to say, hey, you tell us what you need and we'll do our best to support you. And I don't think that's going to change back. That power shift is going to be where it's at and probably gain more momentum. And so it continues to change day by day. We haven't reached a new norm yet. We don't know, to the point I believe Felicia made, what is the future of the workforce? Who knows? Today it's one thing, tomorrow it's another, in a year it's going to be completely different. You know, got great resignation and then the great regret, and you know, inflation is crazy. The world is shifting at such a rapid pace that if you're not a good continuous learner, you're not going to be able to keep up and you will become obsolete. But the important thing is to also not overreact or underreact to that feedback. Don't listen to the loud, unhappy minority. You know, weight the feedback that you're giving with what people are saying. What is the majority saying? And also accept that as you start to change, to address these new norms, to address this feedback, there will be people who don't want to take that journey with you, who don't want to make the transition with what your company is doing. And I think you have to be okay with that. I think that there will be another company for them where those values align better. And as much as we all need to retain people because we have work to do, I think it's okay to also accept that as we're shifting, we want people to take that journey with us and let go of the ones who don't want to come along, whether that be leaders or even those, you know, entry-level positions all across the spectrum. And I think that is what is critical to successfully being a continuous listener, is just being pragmatic and making hard decisions, doing what's right for the majority of the population, even knowing that you're going to have a minority that's a bit dissatisfied, and being comfortable with that, getting comfortable with the hard conversations for those who want to speak up and say, I hear you, but this is what's best for us. And let's talk about what that means for you.
Right. If you truly believe in the importance of having your employees succeed and feeling heard and being their best selves, sometimes it's a tough conversation. It means helping people figure out where that best place is for them, and if that kind of aligns with the direction that's the best place for the majority of the employees. And so as we kind of start to wrap things up and think about everything that we've discussed here, I'd like to go through everybody and ask them, you know, what's your one call to action for tech companies and leaders within these tech companies? If they want to create a best-in-class employee experience, what do you think that they should start with? And Felicia, I'd love to start with you.
All right. I thought you might. So I was trying to really think about, like, what have we not talked about? So I talked all about listening. And so one call to action, I'm a big fan of design thinking. And one thing about listening is that sometimes the most powerful data is what's actually not being said. And so what we can learn from design thinking is not only figuring out, like, what's the problem you're trying to solve, but as you test that problem to generate ideas, you need to observe your audience or your target population. And it's not just by surveying them and asking them questions, it's actually looking at the cues, signals, behaviors, and habits that are underlying what's not being said. And so how you do that is like by leveraging change champions, or, you know, have people listen and notice what is being used, not being used, what's being said, what's not being said, to really then round out your full-on perspective of the voices, because humans are multidimensional, and it's not just what we say, it's actually what we do. And that will create more of a holistic understanding for how you may need to adopt or iterate across your employee experience as you move through the next phase of life. So that's what I would say.
Awesome. Juliet, I'd love to hear from you next.
So what's the one thing? I actually have maybe two things to share. I would say, well, one, as part of that listening tour, or finding avenues to create opportunities for employees to share in safe spaces, creating psychological safety that allows people to give that feedback. But it's also important to ensure that we are finding ways to ask the right questions as well, that is soliciting the right feedback as well. I think, and I'm guilty of this as well. Sometimes we come in with an assumption or an assertion or a hypothesis, but it's not really always what our employees want to talk about. It may be something that we think they want to talk about, but approaching our these listening tours or conversations in a way that helps us to refine what those hypotheses are, what the needs are we asking the right questions, are we providing the right solutions? And then there's multitudes of ways to approach that as well. So if it's not a listening session, like for example, for Zillow, we do employee surveys quarterly. And we embed different questions all the time to focus on certain areas of the business that we want to make sure that we're highlighting and giving people an opportunity to share their experience. And it provides us with data, measurable data that leads us to asking those right questions as well, and continuing that cycle of information sharing and feedback as well. So I think maybe that's one or two, but I think they're all integrated in that as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll chime in here as well. I think we're hearing it from everyone, but that listening and learning from your employees to me is extremely important. But to Juliet's point about creating that safe space and building trust with your employees, I also think is really important. And I think that in order to build trust, it is equally important for a company or a team of people to be transparent. So hitting on one of those points I said earlier, and then also just giving your employees the tools and resources to be successful in their roles. So that way you can keep them long-term. We heard a whole host of things, but state interviews and, doing trainings with them, creating development plans, etc.
And I'll just add in my 2 cents here, Greg. And I think this has been a theme throughout this entire session. And that is empowering managers, teaching them, training them. But I will tell you that the most successful companies, and the call to action that I would have is, it's hard. And we have to be able to embrace the difficulty of it. And 2, this is a form, for a lot of HR leaders, but it's actually not your job. It is the job of executives and the leadership team to drive this from the top down. And we can be there on the front line saying, this is what we're doing, this is how we're supposed to do it. But if that's not the way your leaders are acting, if that's not how they are making decisions, that gives permission for people to operate outside of those boundaries. And then that's where you see unrest, because there's not consistency. And HR can try and do our best to corral and coach and influence. But at the end of the day, we don't manage these leaders. We don't manage these managers. And so it really does have to be top down. And so as you, as HR leaders, are making proposals, be strategic in what you're asking, have a solid business case, have data that backs up your recommendations so that you can get support from executives instead of just making it seem like you're bubbling up complaints. And it does take a little more strategy and effort and work, but I think it's worth it because when they start to see the value and we can measure changes that are happening, then we really start to have a voice. And that voice is the voice of the people, because we are frontline to hear what's going on. But encourage that from the top down. And if you're not getting the support, give yourself a break. There's only so much you can do as an HR professional if those changes aren't coming from top down. So that might be some parting words I would leave is that.
Wonderful. And as we kind of talk about ownership and kind of the roles people play in all of this, that actually ties in really nicely with a question submitted from the audience. So if you have any questions that you'd like us to answer in these last couple of moments, feel free to share them there. Julia, I already see that you've been contemplating this question a little bit. So how do we create an understanding that DEI and the ERG teams aren't the sole owners of creating a place where people feel belonging? How do we get people outside of those groups to also participate and feel ownership?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's something that I lean on quite heavily in my conversations with across the business as well. And so at Zillow, really taking an approach that is intended to empower and enable others in the organization, in particular managers and our executives, as champions of DEI within their own respective teams and other spheres of influence as well. So everyone in the business has responsibility and accountability for DEI, and it's important to articulate that in a way that helps them to see how, one, it supports their internal relationships, but also how it connects back to the overall objective of the business and what they're driving towards. So for example, with Zillow, if we're saying, if we emphasize that we want to build effective, close customer relationships, then that championing DEI and finding ways of what that conscious leadership and inclusive leadership practices are is supportive of how we execute on our business strategy as well. And so that's an empowerment and an enabling tool to continue to influence and strive towards reaching a much larger organizational goal as well. And everyone has ownership and responsibility for that.
Thanks for that. And it looks like we're just about hitting our time here. And so I really appreciate everybody joining us to understand how the tech industry is leading the way in a best-in-class employee experience. I suspect people have a lot more questions that they'd love to have answered, things that they're thinking about. Please don't forget that you can reach out to us on LinkedIn and chat with us a little bit more there. And then if you also have any questions about All Voices, please feel free to reach out to Christina and she can share a little bit more. I thank you to all of our panelists. It was really insightful. I'm feeling a little more enlightened after everything that's been shared. And thank you everybody who attended. Really appreciate it.